I stepped away from my exhausting career and bought a private lake mansion in Minnesota to find peace. Then my younger brother called and announced he was moving in because my place was big enough for both of us. I did not argue. But when he actually showed up at my gates with his pregnant wife and two massive moving trucks, he discovered exactly what kind of welcome I had waiting for him. My name is Natalie, and at 34 years old, I finally thought I had escaped the toxic grip of my family. The iron gates of my $2.5 million estate on Lake Minnetonka stood tall against the biting cold of the Minnesota wind. I sat inside my SUV staring through the windshield at the audacity blocking my driveway. Two rental trucks idled loudly, spewing white exhaust into the freezing air. Suddenly, a heavy fist pounded aggressively against my driver's side window. It was my younger brother Derek. His face was red from the cold and his eyes were wide with entitled rage. "Open the gates, Natalie!" he shouted, his voice muffled through the glass. "You cannot just leave your family freezing out here in 40-degree weather. Open up right now." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set hard boundaries with family members who tried to take advantage of your success. I slowly rolled down my window, letting the freezing wind whip through the cabin of my car. I looked past Derek and saw his wife Jasmine standing near the first truck. Jasmine is an African-American lifestyle influencer who built her online persona around luxury she could not afford. Right now, she was shivering in her designer coat, holding her smartphone high and talking directly into the camera. She was live streaming to her followers. "Guys, I cannot believe this is happening," Jasmine wailed, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "My husband and I drove all the way out here because his rich sister promised to help us prepare for our baby. Now she is literally locking us out in the cold. This is incredibly cruel." I turned my attention back to Derek, who was shivering but glaring at me with that same arrogant expectation he had carried since childhood. He was the golden child our parents always protected. I took a slow, deep breath, maintaining the stoic composure that made me so successful as a forensic accountant. "Derek," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "What exactly are you doing here with two moving trucks?" "We are moving in," Derek stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Jasmine is pregnant and needs a stress-free environment. You live alone. Family takes care of family, Natalie. Mom and Dad already said it was a great idea, so just open the gate and let the movers do their job." I leaned back in my leather seat, resting my hands on the steering wheel. I let a few seconds of silence pass before I responded. "Family takes care of family," I repeated softly. "Is that the same family motto you used 3 years ago when I let you stay in my New York apartment? You remember that, right? I let you stay there rent-free. Instead, you secretly took out loans using my address, forged my signature on utility bills, and racked up $100,000 in debt before skipping town and leaving me to clean up the mess." Derek scoffed, waving his hand. "That was years ago," he snapped. "I am a different person now. I am going to be a father. You have more money than you know what to do with anyway. Stop holding on to the past and open the gate. Jasmine is freezing, and the movers are charging by the hour." I looked over at Jasmine, who was still pointing her phone camera in my direction. They thought my desire to avoid a public scene would force me to cave. They had no idea who they were dealing with anymore. I let out a defeated sigh, pretending their pressure had finally broken my resolve. "Fine," I said quietly. "Get back in your truck. I will let you in." Derek smirked proudly. "I knew you would see reason," he said before jogging back. I watched them climb into the truck, celebrating their victory. I reached toward the console to press the gate button, but right before the heavy door swung, I picked up my phone, opened my voice memo app, and pressed record. I placed the device face down into the cup holder and smiled as the engines roared loudly. Let the games begin. The heavy iron gates groaned open. The two massive moving trucks rumbled up my heated cobblestone driveway, leaving thick tracks of melted snow in their wake. I stepped out of my SUV and braced myself against the freezing Minnesota wind. Almost instantly, Derek and Jasmine hopped out of the lead truck, acting like they owned the entire $2.5 million estate. Derek immediately started clapping his hands and barking orders at the three exhausted-looking movers. "Come on, guys, let us get a move on," he yelled, pointing toward the grand mahogany double doors of my entryway. "The baby furniture goes upstairs. Be careful with the marble floors. Do not scuff the baseboards. I want everything unloaded before noon." Jasmine strutted past me without even a simple thank you. She handed me her empty venti iced coffee cup and a crumpled fast food bag. "Here, Natalie, be a dear and throw these away for me, will you?" she said, not even looking me in the eye. "I need to make sure these guys do not scratch my vintage vanity mirror. My followers will notice if my background looks cheap." I looked at the garbage in my hand, and then at the pristine facade of my beautiful home. I calmly dropped her trash directly onto the snowy driveway. Jasmine whipped her head around, her eyes narrowing. "What is your problem?" she snapped. "I am pregnant and exhausted. You could at least try to be helpful. It is not like you have anything better to do." She looked me up and down with a condescending smirk. "Honestly, Natalie, it is a blessing we are here. A house this big is just depressing for a lonely, childless spinster. You have all this money, and for what? No husband to share it with and no kids to pass it down to. Our family was always so worried about you ending up alone. Now my baby will finally bring some life into this empty museum." Her words were a direct echo of our mother. In my family, a woman was only considered successful if she was serving a man or raising his children. My career as a forensic accountant, my financial independence, my ability to retire at 34 meant absolutely nothing to them because I did not have a wedding ring on my finger. They viewed my wealth as an unearned surplus that rightfully belonged to the men in the family. They genuinely believed I existed merely to provide resources for Derek. I did not flinch at her insult. I simply watched as the movers struggled to carry a massive velvet headboard through my front door. Jasmine clapped her hands again, addressing the lead mover. "Take that straight up the main staircase to the master suite," she instructed loudly. "The one with the vaulted ceilings and the balcony overlooking the lake. That will be our bedroom." I stepped forward, blocking the mover path. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "The master suite is my room. My clothes are in the walk-in closet and my confidential files are in the attached study." Derek marched over, puffing out his chest. "Come on, Natalie, do not be selfish. Jasmine is pregnant. She needs the largest room with the best view for her mental health. You can take one of the guest rooms down the hall. They are perfectly fine for one person. It is only fair since we are going to be a real family here. The master suite should belong to the head of the household anyway, and I am the man of the house now." I looked at Derek and then at Jasmine, who was already crossing her arms in defiance, ready for a screaming match. They wanted a fight. They wanted me to yell so they could call our parents and cry about how unhinged and cruel I was being. They expected me to throw a tantrum defending my territory, but a former forensic accountant does not yell. A forensic accountant documents and secures leverage. I smiled a slow, chilling smile that made Derek take a half step back. "You know what, Derek?" I said smoothly. "You are absolutely right. The master suite does have the best view and the safest layout for a pregnant woman. You two can have it." Jasmine let out a loud, triumphant sigh. "See, was that so hard?" she muttered, rolling her eyes. "But before you move a single box in there," I added, cutting her off, "we have to handle some basic paperwork. My homeowner insurance policy is incredibly strict about liability in the master wing due to the expensive artwork and the custom balcony. If you two want to occupy that specific suite, you just need to sign a standard insurance liability form to protect me in case someone trips and falls. It is just a routine formality for the insurance company." Derek shrugged dismissively, turning his back to me. "Fine, whatever. Bring out the paperwork and let us get this over with." He had absolutely no idea what he had just agreed to sign. The next morning, I woke up early, as I usually did. I poured myself a cup of hot black coffee and stood by the massive kitchen island, watching the snow fall gently over the frozen surface of the lake. My brief moment of peace was violently shattered by the sound of the front door swinging open. Heavy, frantic footsteps echoed through the marble foyer. It was barely 8 in the morning, but my parents, Richard and Brenda, had already arrived unannounced. They did not knock or ring the doorbell. Derek must have given them the secure entry code when he arrived the previous day. I stepped out of the kitchen expecting at least a basic greeting from the people who raised me. Instead, my mother Brenda walked right past me without making eye contact. She marched straight up the grand staircase, heading directly for my master suite on the second floor. My father Richard followed close behind her, carrying a large cardboard box filled with heavy-duty black trash bags. "Morning, Dad," I said, my voice intentionally flat and emotionless. "What exactly are you doing here so early?" Richard paused on the landing and looked down at me with a stern, disapproving expression. "We are helping your brother get settled," he replied bluntly. "Jasmine is exhausted from the move, and she needs the master bedroom ready today. Your mother is going to pack up your closet so the movers can bring up their heavy bedroom furniture." I set my coffee mug down on the hallway console table and walked quickly up the stairs. When I reached my bedroom, I found my mother actively pulling my expensive designer suits and delicate silk blouses off their velvet hangers. She was aggressively shoving my professional clothing into a black plastic trash bag like they were worthless pieces of garbage. "Stop it right now," I commanded, stepping into the room and grabbing her wrist. "What do you think you are doing?" Brenda snatched her arm away and glared at me with sheer contempt. "Do not use that disrespectful tone with me, Natalie," she snapped. "We are moving your things down to the finished basement. It has a bathroom and a small window, so it is perfectly fine for you. Derek and Jasmine need this massive space. They are starting a family, and they deserve to be comfortable." I stood my ground, firmly placing myself between my mother and the rest of my closet. "I am not moving into the basement of a house that I bought with my own hard-earned money," I said. "This is my home. If Derek and Jasmine want to stay here, they will take the guest rooms down the hall." Richard walked into the room, dropping the box of trash bags onto my pristine hardwood floor with a loud thud. "Do not be so incredibly selfish, Natalie." He raised his voice, pointing an angry finger directly at my face. "Derek is the man of his own household now. He needs the space more than you do. You have always been so ungrateful and stubborn. Your brother is bringing a child into this world and carrying on the family legacy. You are just sitting up here hoarding wealth and space that you do not even need." His cruel words were not shocking to me. They were exactly the same words I had heard my entire life. When I was 16, my parents took the savings from my part-time job to buy Derek a used car. When I went to college, I had to take out massive student loans because they drained my college fund to pay for Derek to attend a luxury sports camp. I was always expected to sacrifice my own comfort and security to pave the way for their golden child. My achievements were completely ignored, but my resources were always demanded and expected. I looked my father straight in the eye, refusing to back down or show fear. "I am not moving to the basement," I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "And if you touch another piece of my clothing, I will have the local police escort all of you off my property for trespassing." Richard's face turned bright red with pure fury. He stepped closer into my personal space, trying to use his height and anger to intimidate me into submission. "You listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful little brat," he hissed. "You think you are so smart with your fancy accounting degree and your early retirement. You think you can treat your own flesh and blood like garbage just because you bought a big fancy house? I know exactly how things work on Wall Street, Natalie. No one makes this kind of money at your age without bending the rules and breaking the law." I stared at him blankly, processing the sheer audacity of his words. "Are you accusing me of a crime, Dad? I am saying that if you do not pack your bags and move to that basement right now, I will make a phone call." He threatened, a malicious smile creeping onto his aging face. "I will call the managing partners at your old firm, and I will call the federal authorities. I will tell them that you embezzled millions of dollars from your corporate clients to buy this lakefront mansion. They will freeze your bank accounts, investigate every penny you have, and ruin your precious professional reputation forever. Now get out of this room before I destroy your entire life." I let my breath hitch in my throat. I widened my eyes and forced my lower lip to tremble just enough to be convincing. In my years investigating corporate fraud at the highest levels of Wall Street, I learned one absolute truth about criminals and narcissists. If you confront them directly, they will destroy evidence and burn the building down with you inside. But if you surrender and let them believe they have completely dominated you, they become sloppy. They become so intoxicated by their own perceived power that they gladly walk right into the traps you lay for them. My father thought he was playing a brilliant game of chess, but he was not even playing the same game as me. I allowed a single tear to roll down my cheek. "Please, Dad," I whispered, my voice shaking with perfectly calculated fear. "Please do not call the firm. You know how hard I worked to build my career. If you start a rumor like that, even if it is completely false, the federal investigations alone would cost me everything I have worked for. I would lose my licenses and my reputation." Richard puffed out his chest, standing taller in my bedroom. He smirked down at me, looking like a king who had just conquered a peasant uprising. "Exactly," he sneered. "So you are going to be a good sister and a respectful daughter. You are going to let your mother finish packing these trash bags, and you are going to take your things down to the basement where you belong. Are we clear, Natalie?" "Yes," I mumbled, looking down at my feet. "I am sorry. You and Derek can have the master suite. Just please do not ruin my life over this." Brenda scoffed loudly and went back to aggressively pulling my clothes off the hangers, shoving them into the black plastic bags with unnecessary force. "See, Richard," she said without looking back at us. "I told you she just needed to be reminded of her place. She has always been too big for her boots." I turned around and walked out of the room, my head hung low in an exaggerated display of utter defeat. I could hear them congratulating themselves as I slowly descended the grand staircase. I carried the heavy bags down to the finished basement. It was actually a beautiful space with a private bathroom, a small gym, and a home theater, but to my parents, it was a dungeon designed to punish me. I took my time unpacking my clothes and setting up my new temporary living quarters. I needed to give them a few hours to settle in and let their guard down. I needed them to feel like absolute victors. By mid-afternoon, Derek and Jasmine had fully taken over the upstairs suite. My parents had left to run errands, proudly telling Derek they would be back for dinner to celebrate his new home. I walked upstairs into the massive gourmet kitchen to find Derek sitting alone at the marble island, eating a sandwich and scrolling through his phone. He looked up at me with a lazy, smug grin. "Hey, sis," he said, his mouth full of food. "Thanks for finally being reasonable. Jasmine is taking a nap upstairs. The bed is incredibly comfortable, by the way. Good choice on the mattress." I forced a weak, subservient smile and walked around the island. "I am glad she is resting," I said softly, pouring myself a glass of water. "But Derek, since you guys are going to be staying here for the foreseeable future, there is just one administrative thing we need to take care of today. It is extremely annoying, but my homeowner association is ridiculously strict about long-term guests in this gated neighborhood." I reached into a manila envelope I had brought up from my basement office and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. I slid the document across the smooth marble counter toward him, along with a heavy silver pen. "What is this?" he asked, eyeing the paperwork suspiciously, but not bothering to actually read the dense legal text on the front page. "It is just a temporary residency and tax declaration form." I lied smoothly, keeping my voice light and apologetic. "Because this is a high-wealth tax district, the HOA needs an official record of any adults living here who are not the primary property owner. It also proves to the local tax authority that you are not paying me rent, so I do not get hit with a commercial income tax penalty at the end of the year. If we do not file this, they will fine me thousands of dollars and they will restrict your gate access codes. It is just a stupid formality." Derek groaned, rolling his eyes at the inconvenience. "Rich people and their stupid rules," he muttered, picking up the pen. Right as the tip of the heavy silver pen touched the paper, the front door chimed. My parents walked into the grand foyer carrying brown paper bags overflowing with expensive groceries and a shiny green bottle of vintage champagne. At the exact same moment, Jasmine slowly descended the grand wooden staircase, wearing a sheer silk robe and rubbing her eyes. What is going on down here? Jasmine asked dramatically, placing a hand over her supposedly pregnant belly. I was trying to get some sleep, but I heard voices. Oh, Natalie is just being her usual bureaucratic self, Derek said, waving the silver pen in the air. She wants me to sign some massive stack of tax declarations for her homeowner association so she does not get fined. My father Richard set the heavy grocery bags on the dining room table and marched directly into the kitchen. He narrowed his eyes at the thick document and let out a loud, mocking laugh. Are you actually kidding me, Natalie? He said, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. Your brother just drove halfway across the country. Jasmine is pregnant and completely exhausted. We are trying to have a nice family celebration dinner tonight, and you are harassing them with meaningless legal paperwork. You really do not have a heart, do you? It is just a standard local form, Dad, I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and apologetic. I just need his signature on the last page to keep the neighborhood board happy. My mother Brenda rolled her eyes and started carelessly unpacking the groceries. Just sign the stupid thing, Derek, she called out from the refrigerator. Your sister loves to make everything complicated just to feel important. She spent too much time on Wall Street and forgot how normal humans behave. Do not bother reading it. It is probably just a bunch of legal jargon to protect her precious bank accounts from taxes. You know exactly how greedy she is. Jasmine walked over and wrapped her arms around the shoulders of my brother, peering at the paper with a bored expression. Seriously, babe, just sign it, she whined loudly. I am so hungry, and I want to pop that champagne your parents brought. We have a massive amount to celebrate today. We finally have a real home for our baby. Derek puffed out his chest, soaking in the immediate validation from his wife and his parents. He looked at me with a deeply condescending sneer. Fine, he said. But do not expect me to fill out any more of your ridiculous forms, Natalie. I am not your corporate employee. He flipped directly to the last page, completely ignoring the 20 pages of dense text preceding it. He aggressively scribbled his signature on the bottom line and forcefully shoved the document back across the marble island toward me. The heavy pen rolled off the edge and clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. There he announced, crossing his arms. Now leave us alone so we can enjoy our evening. I calmly bent down, picked up the pen, and carefully gathered the papers. Thank you, Derek, I said softly. I will go file this right now, so the homeowner association leaves us alone. As I turned to walk away, my father popped the cork on the champagne bottle. The loud pop echoed through the vaulted ceilings of the kitchen, followed by loud cheering from my mother and Jasmine. I heard the sharp clinking of crystal glasses. A toast, my father announced, his voice booming with arrogant pride. To Derek and Jasmine, to my future grandson, and to their beautiful new home. May this house finally be filled with the warmth and love it has been missing for so long. I did not look back. I walked down the hall and descended the stairs into the basement. I entered my temporary office, locked the heavy, solid wood door behind me, and walked over to my fireproof wall safe. I spun the combination dial, pulled the heavy steel handle, and gently placed the signed document inside the metal vault. As the heavy safe door clicked shut, a genuine bright smile finally spread across my face. My parents and my brother thought I was just a greedy coward trying to avoid a minor tax penalty. They had absolutely no idea what Derek had just signed. When you let someone live in your home without a formal agreement, they quickly establish residential squatter rights. In the state of Minnesota, evicting a residential squatter or a non-paying family member can take 6 to 9 months of grueling court battles. During that time, they can destroy your property and make your life a living hell with zero immediate consequences. But the document locked in my safe was not a temporary residency declaration. It was an ironclad commercial lease agreement. By signing it, Derek legally classified himself as a commercial entity leasing high-end corporate event space. Commercial leases have absolutely no residential squatter protections. Furthermore, buried in the fine print was a strict liability clause. Any unauthorized party's property damage or police presence would result in an immediate contract violation and a strict penalty of $5,000 per day. They thought they had trapped me in my own house. But the truth was, I had just legally locked them inside a financial pressure cooker, and they had happily handed me the detonator. 2 days later, the detonator was officially triggered. I was sitting at my desk in the basement office when the heavy thumping of bass began rattling the ceiling tiles. I opened my laptop and pulled up the feeds from my indoor security cameras. What I saw on the screen made me lean back in my chair and smile. Jasmine had not just invited a few friends over, she had transformed my massive indoor heated pool area into a full-blown influencer networking event. Through the high-definition cameras, I counted at least 50 people wandering around my estate holding expensive cocktails and posing with ring lights. But this was not just a social gathering. Jasmine had posted a digital flyer on her social media accounts the night before, charging a $100 entry fee for exclusive networking access to what she was calling her brand new luxury lakefront property. She was literally collecting admission money at the door using a mobile payment app. I sat in the quiet of my office, pulling up a spreadsheet. I methodically logged every single guest that walked through the door and every public transaction Jasmine verified on her phone. She was conducting an unauthorized commercial ticketing operation on my property. Every ping of her payment app was another documented violation of the commercial lease Derek had signed. Watching them blatantly exploit my hard work brought back a flood of memories. I remembered being 20 years old, working 60 hours a week at a corporate accounting firm while taking grueling night classes to finish my degree. I had managed to save $25,000 to put toward a down payment on a modest starter home. But my parents found out about the money. They cornered me in our cramped kitchen and demanded I hand it over to pay for Derek to attend an expensive out-of-state party school. When I refused, my father screamed that I was a greedy sociopath ruining my brother's future. They emotionally terrorized me for weeks until I finally transferred the funds. Derek dropped out of that college 3 semesters later, having spent my entire house fund on fraternity dues and ski trips. That was the exact moment my financial boundaries were cast in stone. I promised myself I would never let my family steal my security again. I learned that documentation was the only weapon that mattered. So while Jasmine paraded around my indoor pool, claiming my millions as her own, I simply kept typing, building an undeniable legal case against them. Around 6 in the evening, the party started getting completely out of hand. I watched on the camera feed as a heavily intoxicated guest holding a neon pink drink stumbled out of the pool area and wandered into the main foyer. He was laughing loudly at his phone, trying to record a video for his followers. He was completely ignoring his surroundings and walking directly toward the pedestal holding my authentic Qing Dynasty porcelain vase. I had purchased that piece at a private auction in London for exactly $50,000. It was one of my most prized possessions, and it was fully insured. I held my breath watching the screen. The drunk guest took 2 more sloppy steps backward, trying to get a wider camera angle of my grand staircase. His shoulders slammed hard into the marble pedestal. The heavy antique vase wobbled violently for a split second before plummeting directly onto the hardwood floor. The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the entire house. The loud crash was enough to cut through the thumping music. I watched the guest freeze in sheer panic, staring at the thousands of razor-sharp blue and white shards scattered across the floor. Jasmine rushed out of the pool area, wearing a designer swimsuit and holding a glass of champagne. She stopped and looked at the destroyed artifact. The guest started apologizing frantically, offering to pay for the damage. But Jasmine just threw her head back and let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "Oh my God, do not even worry about it," Jasmine said, waving her hand dismissively. "That is just some cheap junk my sister-in-law picked up at a thrift store. She has terrible taste. Just kick the pieces under the rug so nobody steps on them and let us get back to the party." I sat in the dark of my basement staring at the monitor. Jasmine thought she was being gracious to a fan by dismissing my property as worthless garbage. She had absolutely no idea that she had just triggered the felony destruction of property clause in the commercial lease agreement. The trap was springing shut faster than I ever anticipated. I emerged from the basement stairwell a few minutes later, carrying a heavy-duty broom and a large steel dustpan. I walked into the grand foyer where the drunken guest was standing frozen, looking down at the shattered remains of my antique porcelain vase. When he saw me approaching, he began to babble another round of slurred apologies. He reached into his pocket, fumbling for his wallet, but I simply raised a hand to silence him. "Step back before you cut yourself," I instructed, my voice perfectly level. "You are going to track ceramic dust into the living room." As I knelt down on the hardwood floor and began sweeping the razor-sharp blue and white shards into the metal pan, Jasmine noticed me from the pool area. She immediately signaled for 3 of her flashiest influencer friends to follow her out to the foyer. They gathered in a tight circle around me, holding their phones with the recording lights glowing red. Jasmine pointed down at me with a perfectly manicured nail, her face twisting into a cruel and arrogant smile. "See, guys, I told you she would clean it up," Jasmine announced loudly, making sure her voice carried over the heavy bass of the music. "This is my husband's sister Natalie. She is our grumpy live-in maid." Her friends laughed, sipping their brightly colored drinks and looking at me like I was a pathetic exhibit in a museum. Jasmine leaned in closer, adopting a tone of fake pity for her online audience. "My husband Derek is just so generous," she continued, sighing dramatically. "Natalie has been having a really hard time finding a man and keeping her life together. We honestly felt so bad for her. So Derek and I decided to let her stay down in our finished basement rent-free. In exchange, she just helps out with the cleaning and basic maintenance around the estate. It is the least we can do to keep family off the streets, right?" One of the friends aimed her camera directly down at me, recording me on my hands and knees sweeping up the debris of my own priceless artifact. It was a highly calculated performance designed to completely strip away my dignity and establish Jasmine as the absolute queen of the castle. They wanted me to snap. They desperately wanted me to stand up and scream that this was my house so they could laugh, call me delusional, and post the humiliating video on the internet. But I did not give them a single reaction. I did not flinch. I kept my head down and continued sweeping with methodical precision. I did not care about their petty social media games because I knew exactly what they had just legally accomplished. By publicly dismissing the destruction of a $50,000 insured asset as cheap junk, Jasmine had just cemented their financial liability. Under the strict terms of the commercial lease they signed, property damage of this magnitude immediately crossed the threshold into felony territory in the state of Minnesota. Every single laugh and recorded video only strengthened the irrefutable evidence I was collecting against them. I scooped the final pieces of the Qing Dynasty vase into the dustpan, stood up, and walked away without uttering a single word. I returned to my basement office and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I waited patiently in the dark for the next 6 hours. I listened as the music finally stopped. The drunken guests stumbled out to their ride shares, and the heavy footsteps upstairs eventually faded into complete silence. Once the massive house was perfectly dark and quiet, I opened my high-powered laptop and went to work. During my years as a corporate forensic accountant on Wall Street, I did not just audit basic financial spreadsheets. I specialized in digital asset tracing and advanced network security. If money moved through a digital pipeline, I knew exactly how to track it down. I opened my administration dashboard and tapped directly into the main router logs for the entire estate. I wanted to know exactly what Derek and Jasmine were doing on my wireless network since they arrived. Derek had tried to be clever by using a cheap commercial virtual private network to hide his browsing activity, but his encryption protocols were incredibly basic and outdated. It took me less than 15 minutes of running a packet sniffing program to bypass his weak security and pull a complete cache of his recent search history. I started scrolling through the lines of decrypted data, expecting to find luxury car websites or expensive baby registries. Instead, my blood ran cold as the raw text populated on my bright screen. Derek was not researching baby cribs. He was searching for a way out. I highlighted a massive block of outbound connections Derek had established over the last 48 hours. Most normal people connect to standard social media platforms, streaming services, or news outlets. Derek was doing none of that. Instead, he was pinging secure offshore servers based in the Cayman Islands and constantly refreshing specific threads on an anonymous financial message board. I leaned closer to the monitor and ran a reverse domain name system lookup on the primary IP address he kept visiting. The trace led me straight to a dark web forum dedicated to tracking down perpetrators of digital rug pulls and cryptocurrency fraud. For the last 2 years, my parents had proudly bragged to everyone in our hometown that their golden boy was the brilliant founder of a revolutionary decentralized finance startup. They threw lavish dinner parties celebrating his supposed genius, constantly reminding me that my corporate accounting job was rigid, boring, and lacked true visionary ambition. They treated Derek like he was the next major titan of the tech industry. The reality glowing on my screen was entirely different and utterly sickening. Derek had not built a legitimate tech company. He had launched a fraudulent cryptocurrency token. He used Jasmine and her network of influencer friends to artificially hype the digital coin to their gullible followers, promising massive guaranteed returns. Once thousands of amateur investors had poured their life savings into the project, Derek suddenly drained the entire liquidity pool. He cashed out the funds, transferred the stolen money into untraceable offshore accounts, and completely abandoned the project, causing the token value to plummet to zero in a matter of minutes. He had stolen millions of dollars. Now those devastated investors were furious. The message board I uncovered was filled with hundreds of angry victims actively trying to dox his current physical location. Some users were posting threats of extreme violence, while others claimed they had already compiled digital evidence and forwarded it directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Derek was not in Minnesota because he wanted a quiet, stress-free environment for his supposedly pregnant wife. He was not here because family takes care of family. He was a desperate fugitive running from a massive mob of defrauded victims and highly motivated federal agents. He had fled halfway across the country because his luxury apartment in New York was likely already under federal surveillance. My pulse quickened as the sheer magnitude of his selfishness became clear. By running to my property, he had recklessly brought immense legal and physical danger right to my doorstep. If the federal authorities tracked him here and raided my house while he was living under my roof, my own assets could be temporarily seized just by association. I had spent over a decade building a flawless professional reputation in the highly scrutinized world of forensic accounting. Derek was perfectly willing to let my entire life burn to the ground just to buy himself a few weeks of safety. I needed to know exactly what his next move was. I switched my focus from his general network traffic to his localized search engine queries. I bypassed his browser history, knowing he would likely delete it, and pulled the raw cache files directly from his mobile device via the router network. Line by line, I read through his frantic late-night internet searches from the past 2 days. The first few searches were exactly what I expected from a cornered criminal. He was searching for countries without extradition treaties to the United States, and the fastest ways to obtain a secondary passport. But as I scrolled down to the queries he made just 2 hours ago, while Jasmine was distracted by her pool party, my stomach completely dropped. Derek was no longer searching for ways to flee the country. He was searching for a way to secure permanent funding. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, Derek had typed a highly specific legal question into the search bar. He asked how to legally transfer a property deed using a power of attorney in the state of Minnesota. Immediately beneath that query was another search that sent a genuine chill down my spine. He had asked how to legally declare a sibling mentally unfit to manage their own estate. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glaring white text on the screen. He was not just looking for a temporary place to hide from the authorities. My brother was actively researching how to have me involuntarily committed so he could assume legal control of my life and steal my $2.5 million lakefront mansion right out from under me. I closed the laptop screen. The soft click echoed in the dark basement. My brother was not just a thief. He was actively plotting to steal my freedom and my mind. I needed more evidence of their physical activities in my home. I needed to know exactly how deep their lies went. The opportunity presented itself the very next afternoon. Derek was locked in a guest room down the hall making panicked, hushed phone calls on a burner phone. Jasmine had loudly announced to her livestream followers that the stress of managing her new lakefront property was affecting her pregnancy, and she desperately needed a mental health day. She ordered a luxury black car service and left for a 4-hour high-end spa and manicure appointment in downtown Minneapolis. As soon as the heavy iron gates closed behind her car, I walked silently up the grand staircase. I pushed open the double doors to my master suite. The smell of cheap, heavily perfumed hairspray and stale fast food hit me instantly. They had completely trashed my sanctuary. My expensive silk sheets were stained and tangled. Empty shipping boxes littered the hardwood floor. But I was not there to clean. I was there to audit their physical footprint. I walked straight into the master bathroom. My expensive organic soaps had been swept off the counter and replaced with messy piles of luxury makeup palettes. I knelt down next to the brushed steel trash can tucked under the floating vanity. A forensic accountant knows that people discard their most incriminating secrets in the garbage because they believe once it is out of sight, it ceases to exist. I pulled on a pair of latex cleaning gloves and began carefully sifting through the discarded tissues, empty beauty product boxes, and crumpled wrappers. Near the very bottom of the bin, my fingers brushed against a thick piece of premium cardstock. It was crumpled into a tight ball hidden beneath a layer of discarded makeup wipes. I pulled it out and carefully smoothed it flat on the cool marble countertop. It was a detailed packing slip from a highly specialized theatrical supply company based in Los Angeles. The shipping address printed at the top was Derek and Jasmine Old Apartment in New York. The delivery date was just 3 weeks ago, right before they showed up unannounced at my gates. I read the item description printed in stark black ink. Premium medical-grade silicone maternity prosthetic, 6 to 8 month progression. Shade-matching deep bronze. The total cost charged to the credit card was over $2,000. I stared at the paper, my mind rapidly connecting the dots. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into place. Jasmine was not pregnant. There was no baby. There was no future grandson for my parents to dote on. The entire narrative was a calculated, predatory lie. Every time Jasmine clutched her stomach in fake pain to avoid helping around the house, she was acting. Every time she demanded special treatment or claimed she needed my massive master suite for her mental health, she was exploiting a literal prop. Derek knew that simply asking our parents to help him hide from federal investigators would never work. But presenting them with their first biological grandchild was the ultimate emotional weapon. He used the fake pregnancy to completely manipulate Richard and Brenda, blinding them to his sudden cross-country move and his total lack of income. The imaginary baby was the shield they used to force their way into my home, and the weapon they used to justify terrorizing me. Our parents had always been intensely obsessed with the idea of Derek carrying on the family legacy. They were so desperate to see their golden child become a traditional father that they never bothered to ask for a single medical record or ultrasound picture. They just blindly accepted the lie and viciously attacked me to protect his delusion. I pulled out my phone and took high-resolution photographs of the receipt from multiple angles, making sure the company logo, order number, and shipping details were perfectly clear. I folded the heavy paper and slipped it safely into my pocket. My brother was aggressively researching how to declare me legally insane to steal my house, but he and his wife were parading around my estate with a $2,000 piece of silicone strapped to her stomach. The sheer sociopathy was absolutely breathtaking. They had built a massive house of cards on a foundation of pure delusion, and I was finally ready to burn it all down. I stepped out of the master bathroom, making sure to leave the brushed steel trash bin exactly as I had found it. I walked silently back down the grand staircase to my secure basement office and immediately uploaded the high-resolution photographs of the theatrical receipt to an encrypted cloud server. Just as the progress bar hit 100%, my cell phone buzzed violently on the glass desk. It was a text message from my mother, Brenda. "Come up to the main living room right now," it read. "We are having a family meeting and your attendance is absolutely mandatory." I locked my computer screen and took a slow, deep breath. I walked upstairs and entered the massive vaulted living room. The gas fireplace was roaring, casting long, dancing shadows across the expensive furniture. My parents, Richard and Brenda, were sitting side by side on my custom leather sofa, looking like judges about to hand down a severe criminal sentence. Derek was aggressively pacing back and forth across the Persian rug, rubbing his temples in a theatrical display of stress. Jasmine had apparently returned from her luxury spa appointment early. She was slouched in an oversized armchair, dramatically rubbing her $2,000 silicone belly and sighing heavily. "Sit down, Natalie," my father ordered, pointing to a single wooden chair placed in the dead center of the room. It felt exactly like a police interrogation setup. I silently took my seat and folded my hands in my lap, waiting for the performance to begin. "Your mother and I have been talking." Richard started leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. "We are deeply concerned about your brother and his growing family. Derek left his entire professional network behind in New York to move out here. He claims his cryptocurrency assets are temporarily frozen in a corporate transition. He is making a massive financial sacrifice to provide a peaceful environment for Jasmine and the baby. But right now, they have absolutely no real security. They are living under your roof, completely at your mercy, and quite frankly, your behavior lately has been extremely hostile." I kept my face perfectly blank, refusing to give them the emotional reaction they desperately wanted. "What exactly are you proposing, Dad?" I asked, keeping my voice low and even. Jasmine let out a pathetic little whimper and leaned her head back against the thick fabric of the armchair. "We just cannot live with this constant stress, Natalie," she whispered, dabbing her dry eyes. "Every day I wake up terrified that you are going to kick us out on a whim. It is not good for the baby. My doctor told me today that my blood pressure is dangerously high because of the toxic environment in this house." My mother, Brenda, stood up and walked over to stand right beside Derek. Her eyes were cold and hard. "We are not asking for a favor, Natalie. We are giving you a permanent solution," she said, her voice dripping with absolute authority. "You have millions of dollars and a house that is far too large for one single woman. Tomorrow morning, you are going to contact your real estate attorney. You are going to legally sign over 50% of the equity in this estate to Derek. It will serve as an advance inheritance and a security deposit for his child. Once his name is legally on the deed, Jasmine will finally have the peace of mind she needs to carry this baby to term." I stared at my mother, letting the sheer audacity of her demand hang in the heavy air of the living room. "You want me to give Derek over $1 million of my own equity?" I asked slowly. "For free." "It is not for free. It is for your family," Richard barked, standing up to join my mother. "It is the absolute least you can do after hoarding your wealth all these years while your brother struggled to build his business." I shook my head, pretending to find a sudden burst of courage. "I am not doing that," I said firmly. "I earned this house. I worked 80-hour weeks for a decade. I am not signing over half of my property." That was exactly the pushback Brenda was waiting for. She crossed her arms and her face twisted into a mask of pure vicious cruelty. "Fine," she hissed. "If you want to be a greedy, selfish monster, then you will face the absolute worst consequences. If you do not sign that equity over to your brother by tomorrow, I will call every single family member we have. I will call the pastor at our church and every friend you grew up with. I will tell them all that you threw your heavily pregnant sister-in-law out into the freezing cold because you were bitterly jealous of her baby." She took a step closer, pointing a sharp, manicured finger right at my face. "And then I will publicly disown you." Brenda threatened, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. I will legally remove you from our family trust. You will never be welcome in our hometown again. You will be completely alone, Natalie. No family, no support, nothing. You will be dead to us. I looked around the room. Derek was smirking triumphantly. Jasmine was hiding a deeply satisfied smile behind her hand. My parents looked incredibly proud of their brutal emotional blackmail. They had used this exact same terror tactic to control me my entire life. But this time I knew their absolute worst threat was actually my ultimate prize. I let my shoulders collapse. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged, pretending to be completely broken by her cruel words. Please, Mom, I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. Please do not do that. I do not want to lose my family. Brenda smiled a cold, victorious smile. Then you know exactly what you need to do, she said softly. I looked down at my hands and nodded slowly in total defeat. Okay, I mumbled. You win. I will call my attorney right now. I will have her draft the equity transfer documents tonight. We can all meet at her notary office downtown tomorrow at 10 in the morning to sign the papers. Derek let out a loud, dramatic breath of relief and clapped his hands together. See, I told you guys she would finally step up, he cheered. I stood up from the wooden chair, keeping my head bowed in fake submission. I walked out of the living room and headed straight for the stairs. As I walked away, I could hear my family loudly celebrating their massive financial victory. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and drafted a quick encrypted message to my lawyer. They think they won, I typed. Prepare the commercial eviction notices and the penalty invoices. We are dropping the hammer tomorrow at 10. The next morning, the sleek glass elevator of the tallest skyscraper in downtown Minneapolis carried us up to the 40th floor. The doors slid open to reveal the luxurious reception area of my corporate real estate attorney. The polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the frozen city skyline. It was the kind of intimidating wealth and power that usually made people speak in hushed tones. But my family walked in like they had just conquered the entire building. Derek strolled out of the elevator first, adjusting the cuffs of a tailored Italian wool suit. It was a completely absurd outfit for a Tuesday morning, but I knew exactly how he had paid for it. That suit was funded directly by the stolen life savings of the amateur crypto investors he was actively hiding from. He strutted past the reception desk with his chin held high, acting every bit the successful tech founder he pretended to be. He even snapped his fingers at a paralegal demanding a cup of black coffee. Jasmine was right behind him, leaning heavily on my mother Brenda for support. Jasmine was wearing a tight-knit maternity dress specifically chosen to highlight the massive $2,000 silicone bump strapped to her stomach. She placed one hand on the small of her back and let out a series of loud, exhausted sighs, complaining to anyone who would listen about how the bumpy car ride had aggravated her sciatica. My father Richard trailed behind them, wearing a smug, victorious grin. He looked at me with an expression of sheer triumph, fully believing he had finally broken my spirit and secured his family legacy. We were escorted into the main glass-walled conference room by my lead attorney, Ms. Montgomery. Ms. Montgomery was a brilliant, ruthless legal strategist who charged $800 an hour. We had worked together closely during my days as a corporate forensic accountant. She knew exactly how I operated, and more importantly, she knew my actual net worth. She knew I could buy this entire law firm in cash if I really wanted to. But as she walked into the room, wearing a razor-sharp navy blue suit, she played her part absolutely flawlessly. "Please have a seat, everyone," Ms. Montgomery said, her tone perfectly polite and deferential. "I understand we have some urgent family real estate matters to conclude this morning." Derek dropped confidently into the large leather executive chair at the head of the mahogany table. He casually threw his expensive leather portfolio onto the polished wood. "Yes, we do," Derek said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "My sister has finally agreed to do the right thing and transfer 50% of her property equity into my name. We are starting a family and we need secure assets immediately. Let us make this quick. I have some very important calls to make with my investors later today. Jasmine groaned softly and rubbed her fake belly. Please hurry, she added, giving the lawyer a pathetic look. The stress of this unstable living situation is really hurting the baby. My doctor said I need absolute peace of mind. My parents nodded vigorously in agreement. Just bring out the transfer deed, Brenda demanded, crossing her arms and glaring at me from across the table. Natalie has already agreed to all the terms. We are not leaving this office until Derek is legally the co-owner of that house. You do not need to overcomplicate things with lawyer talk. Just give him the pen. I sat quietly near the corner of the long table, keeping my hands folded in my lap, and my eyes fixed on the floor. I looked exactly like a completely defeated woman who had been successfully bullied into surrendering her life savings. I let my shoulders slump and took a shaky breath. Ms. Montgomery gave me a brief, imperceptible nod. Of course, Ms. Montgomery said smoothly, opening her thick leather briefcase. I have all the necessary paperwork right here prepared exactly as Natalie instructed late last night. We take these matters very seriously when commercial assets are involved. Derek reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. He clicked it open and hovered it over the table, a greedy, hungry look flashing in his eyes. Excellent, he sneered. Slide the deed over here. Show me where to sign so we can go celebrate. Ms. Montgomery pulled a single crisp sheet of heavy white paper from her file. She did not hand it to me. Instead, she walked slowly down the length of the conference table and placed the document directly onto the polished wood, right in front of Derek. Derek smirked and leaned forward, fully ready to sign away half of my $2.5 million estate. He looked down at the paper. His smug smile instantly froze. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and completely terrified. He blinked rapidly, staring at the bold black letters printed at the top of the page. What is this? Derek whispered, his voice suddenly trembling. Ms. Montgomery clasped her hands neatly in front of her. That is an itemized commercial penalty invoice and a 24-hour criminal eviction notice, she stated coldly. Derek stared at the crisp white paper as if it had suddenly caught fire. His hands trembled so violently that the document rattled against the mahogany table. $250,000, he gasped, his voice cracking under the sheer weight of the number. What the hell is this, Natalie? This says I owe you $250,000 for back rent, property damage, and unauthorized commercial event fees. This has to be some kind of sick joke. There is no joke, Derek, I said. I slowly lifted my head and straightened my posture, instantly dropping the pathetic, defeated act I had been playing since yesterday. I looked him dead in the eye and let the freezing cold reality of his situation wash over him. The document you signed in my kitchen was not a homeowner association tax declaration. It was an ironclad commercial lease agreement. You legally designated yourself as a commercial entity renting luxury event space. Every single person at that pool party who paid Jasmine an entry fee cemented your legal status. Jasmine sat up straight, her hands dropping away from her fake silicone belly. You cannot do that, she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. We are family. You let us move in. We have squatter rights. If you want us out, you have to take us to civil court, and that takes months. We are not going anywhere. Ms. Montgomery adjusted her glasses and looked at Jasmine with a look of absolute professional pity. Actually, that is entirely incorrect, she stated smoothly. Residential squatter rights do not apply to commercial lease agreements in the state of Minnesota. Furthermore, by throwing a ticketed networking event on the property and destroying a $50,000 insured antique vase, you triggered the felony destruction and unauthorized commercial use clauses of the contract. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. You thought you were so incredibly smart, Derek? I said, my voice steady and razor-sharp. You thought you could just barge into my home, emotionally terrorize me, and hold my own property hostage. You thought I was just going to roll over because Mom and Dad yelled at me. But you did not read the fine print. Commercial leases do not require a 6-month civil eviction process. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. If you are still on my property tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, It is no longer a civil residential dispute. It becomes criminal trespassing and the local authorities will arrest you on the spot. The entire conference room descended into a stunned, suffocating silence. The arrogant, triumphant energy that had filled the room just 2 minutes ago completely evaporated. Derek looked like he was going to be sick. He knew he did not have $250, let alone $250,000. He was trapped in a financial cage of his own making. Suddenly, my father Richard slammed both of his fists down onto the table with a deafening crack. He jumped to his feet, his face purple with uncontrollable rage. "You manipulative little snake," he roared, the veins bulging in his neck. "I knew it. I knew you were too greedy to ever do the right thing for your own flesh and blood. You think you can use fancy lawyer tricks to destroy your brother?" He lunged across the wide table, knocking over his leather chair and pointing a furious, trembling finger inches from my face. "I will not let you get away with this, Natalie," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "If you do not rip up that fake invoice and sign this house over to Derek right now, I am pulling the plug on your entire future. I am officially removing you from the family trust fund. I am taking away every single penny of your inheritance. You will get absolutely nothing when I die." I did not flinch. I did not lean back. I just sat there and let him scream until his lungs gave out. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed through the quiet law office. "Oh, Dad," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You really have absolutely no idea how any of this works, do you?" Richard narrowed his eyes, breathing heavily. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snarled. Ms. Montgomery calmly opened a second folder and slid a bank statement across the table toward my father. I leaned in close, locking eyes with the man who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. "You cannot take away my trust fund." "Dad," I whispered, my voice dripping with absolute satisfaction, "because you never funded it." "I did. That massive account you have been bragging about to your friends for the last 10 years was seeded entirely by the corporate bonuses I secretly deposited to keep you from going bankrupt. I own the trust. And as of this morning, you and Mom are completely cut off." The silence in the conference room became absolute. My father Richard stood frozen with his mouth slightly open, staring at the bank statement Ms. Montgomery had pushed across the mahogany table. The realization that his entire financial safety net, the trust fund he had used as a weapon against me for a decade, was actually my money, finally crashed down on him. His legs gave out and he collapsed heavily back into his leather chair, the fight completely draining from his aging body. My mother Brenda covered her mouth with trembling hands, her eyes wide with sudden absolute terror. But Derek did not freeze. The realization that he was completely cornered, that my parents had no money to save him, and that the eviction notice was real, stripped away his polished tech founder facade entirely. He let out a visceral, guttural scream and kicked the heavy wooden chair next to him, sending it crashing against the glass wall of the conference room. He stormed around the table, closing the distance between us in 3 long strides. He towered over me, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure feral rage. "I am not leaving that house, Natalie," he roared, the veins in his neck bulging. "You think a piece of paper is going to stop me? You think you can just snap your fingers and throw your own brother out into the freezing cold? I will burn that mansion to the ground before I let you kick me out. Family takes care of family. That is the rule. We are moving in and we are staying. If you try to send the police to remove me, I swear to God I will make you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." He slammed his fist onto the table inches from my hands, trying to use physical intimidation to break my composure. In the past, a sudden display of masculine violence like this would have terrified me into submission. Our parents always allowed Derek to throw aggressive tantrums when he did not get his way, excusing his volatile behavior as simply being passionate. But standing in this secure law office, I felt absolutely no fear. I just looked up at him with cold, clinical disgust. My forensic accounting career had put me in rooms with real dangerous criminals. Derek was just a pathetic, desperate child throwing a tantrum because his stolen toy was being taken away. Seeing that Derek's physical threats were completely failing to elicit a reaction from me, Jasmine instantly pivoted her strategy. She pulled her smartphone out of her designer purse and hit the record button. She stepped back, framing both me and Derek in the shot, tears streaming down her carefully contoured face. "Guys, I need help immediately," Jasmine cried out, her voice shaking with perfectly manufactured panic. "My sister-in-law Natalie is literally extorting us. My husband and I are being violently evicted from our home without any notice. She knows I am a high-risk pregnant black woman, and she is throwing me out onto the street in the middle of winter just because she is jealous and hateful. Please, someone call the authorities. We are not safe. She is trying to destroy my family." Jasmine was desperately attempting to weaponize her identity and her fake pregnancy for the internet. She knew that a highly edited, out-of-context video of a wealthy white woman seemingly abusing a pregnant black influencer would instantly ignite a massive digital mob. She was trying to spark absolute internet outrage, hoping the threat of public cancellation would force me to tear up the eviction notice and let them keep the house. She pushed the camera closer to my face, waiting for me to lash out or try to grab the phone so she could capture the perfect viral moment of physical aggression. She wanted her followers to dox my location and ruin my professional reputation. Ms. Montgomery remained perfectly seated at the head of the table, her hands neatly folded, watching the chaotic performance with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. She knew exactly what was coming next. I slowly stood up from my chair, ignoring the camera completely. I adjusted the cuffs of my silk blouse and smoothed down my skirt. Derek was still breathing heavily, his fists clenched at his sides, waiting for my response. He genuinely believed his violent threats and Jasmine digital extortion had tipped the scales back in their favor. He thought I would back down to avoid a physical altercation or a massive online scandal. I raised my left wrist and deliberately tapped the glass face of my watch. "You really think highly of yourself, Derek," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, chilling whisper that cut right through his heavy breathing. "You think you are the most dangerous person in this room, but you are completely wrong." He narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. I looked him dead in the eyes and offered a thin, merciless smile. "I am talking about the fact that you shouldn't be worrying about me, Derek. You should be worrying about the people waiting in the lobby." Before Derek could even process my words, the heavy frosted glass doors of the conference room swung violently open. He spun around, his fists still clenched, expecting to see a terrified paralegal or maybe a couple of local police officers responding to the dramatic live stream Jasmine was broadcasting. But the three men who strode into the room were not local beat cops, and they were certainly not intimidated by my brother throwing a temper tantrum. They moved with strict military precision, wearing dark tactical pants and heavy navy blue windbreakers. Emblazoned across their chests and backs in bold yellow letters were the initials of the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. The suffocating silence in the room suddenly turned absolute. Jasmine slowly lowered her smartphone, her manufactured tears completely drying up. The fake outrage she had been projecting to her followers vanished instantly, replaced by genuine, unadulterated terror. She realized she was actively broadcasting federal agents on the internet. She fumbled wildly with her screen, ending the live video feed, and instinctively took 2 steps backward, bumping into the glass wall, trying to distance herself from her husband. My father, Richard, stared blindly at the agents, his mouth opening and closing silently. Brenda gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning completely white. They had spent their entire lives treating Derek like a flawless golden idol. Now they were watching 3 heavily armed federal agents flank him in a high-rise corporate law office. Derek took a shaky step backward, his designer suit suddenly looking like a cheap Halloween costume. "What is this?" he stammered, looking wildly between the stoic agents and my calm face. "You called the IRS on me, Natalie. You are actually psychotic. You are trying to frame me for some kind of tax issue over a stupid lease dispute." I stepped out from behind my chair and walked slowly around the table, completely ignoring his desperate attempt to play the victim. "I did not frame you, Derek," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. "And this has absolutely nothing to do with my mansion or your ridiculous commercial lease agreement. This is about the Cayman Islands. This is about the anonymous message boards on the dark web and the thousands of amateur investors you completely robbed blind." Derek's face went completely chalk white. His breathing became shallow and rapid as the walls finally closed in around him. "You thought you were so incredibly clever hiding behind a cheap virtual private network." I continued, enjoying every single second of his collapse. "But you forgot what I do for a living. I'm a retired forensic accountant. I spent over a decade tracing stolen corporate funds across international borders. When I looked at the router logs in my house 2 nights ago, I did not just look at your internet search history. I traced your entire digital footprint. I cracked your encrypted wallets, and I followed the exact path of the millions of dollars you drained from that cryptocurrency liquidity pool." Derek shook his head frantically, raising his trembling hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No, you could not have done that. It was completely decentralized. It was completely untraceable." "Nothing is untraceable when you log into a dark web forum from a residential internet connection in Minnesota," I replied coldly. "I spent 6 hours compiling every IP address, every transaction hash, and every single chat log you created. I packaged your entire fraudulent enterprise into a highly detailed digital dossier. And instead of calling the local police to complain about a broken porcelain vase, I handed that dossier directly to a senior federal prosecutor I used to work with in New York. I served them your entire criminal operation on a silver platter." The lead federal agent, a tall man with steel gray hair and a completely expressionless face, stepped forward. He pulled a folded piece of heavy paper from the inside pocket of his windbreaker. He did not look angry or emotional. He looked like a man who was simply taking out the garbage. "Derek," he began, his voice booming with absolute governmental authority, "we have been tracking your digital movements for the past 3 weeks. Your sister provided the final piece of geographic evidence we needed to secure a federal warrant for your immediate detention." Derek's legs gave out entirely. He sank to his knees on the plush corporate carpet, his expensive Italian wool suit wrinkling around him. He looked up at my parents, tears streaming down his face, begging them to do something to save him. But Richard and Brenda just stared at him, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his crimes. The lead agent stepped right up to my brother and looked down at him. "You are under arrest," the agent stated, pulling a heavy pair of steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "You are being officially charged with multiple federal counts of wire fraud, criminal tax evasion, and international money laundering." Jasmine stared at the heavy steel handcuffs in absolute horror. Her expensive smartphone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered loudly against the polished hardwood floor. The screen cracked instantly, but she did not even look down. The reality of the situation hit her like a freight train. Her carefully curated influencer aesthetic was dead. She was no longer the wealthy wife of a tech genius. She was legally bound to a federal criminal. Pure, unfiltered chaos erupted inside the pristine glass walls of the conference room. My mother, Brenda, violently pushed her chair back. It tipped over and crashed onto the corporate carpet. She lunged toward the lead federal agent, pointing a shaking, perfectly manicured finger directly at his face. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice piercing the air like a siren. "Get your hands off my son right now. You are making a massive mistake. He is a brilliant tech entrepreneur. He has a pregnant wife to take care of. If you want to arrest someone, you need to arrest my daughter, Natalie. She is a liar and a sociopath. She completely fabricated all of this because she is incredibly jealous of her brother. She is trying to steal his company. Arrest her immediately." The lead agent did not even blink. He completely ignored Brenda, treating her hysterical outburst as if it were nothing more than background noise. He smoothly secured the cold steel cuffs around Derek's wrists, pulling his arms tightly behind his back. The sharp metallic click echoed through the room, sealing my brother's fate. The two junior agents stepped forward, expertly maneuvering themselves between Derek and my screaming mother. creating an impenetrable physical barrier. "Ma'am, if you do not step back and lower your voice, you will be detained and charged with obstruction of a federal investigation." The lead agent stated, his tone devoid of any human emotion. Brenda froze mid-step, her mouth snapping shut as the threat of genuine legal consequences finally pierced through her delusion. She took a shaky step back, pressing her hand against her chest. With the room momentarily quiet, the lead agent opened the heavy manila folder he held in his left hand. He began to read aloud from the official federal indictment. His voice was steady and clinical, laying out the exact parameters of the criminal empire Derek had built. "Derek," he read from the document, "you are the primary architect of a decentralized finance token known as Apex Protocol. Between April and November of last year, you actively solicited investments from over 4,000 independent retail investors. You promised these individuals guaranteed monthly yields of 20%, utilizing fraudulent marketing materials and deceptive social media campaigns to artificially inflate the token value." Derek kept his eyes glued to the carpet, his chest heaving as the agent dismantled his entire identity piece by piece. My father, Richard, stood completely paralyzed, leaning heavily against the mahogany table. His face was a mask of confusion and growing dread. The agent continued, flipping to the second page. "On December 4th, you executed a deliberate smart contract exploit. You drained the entire liquidity pool of approximately $7.4 million. You then utilized a series of decentralized mixers and offshore accounts in an attempt to launder the stolen funds and obscure your identity." Listening to the federal agent read the indictment out loud brought a deep sense of professional satisfaction to my core. During my years as a forensic accountant, I had seen countless arrogant men exactly like my brother. They always believed they were the smartest person in the room. They thought the digital world offered them complete anonymity and absolute immunity from consequence. But money always leaves a trail. Every single transaction, every digital signature, every server ping creates an undeniable record. Derek was just a sloppy amateur playing a very dangerous game. But the federal investigation did not start with the offshore accounts. The agent stated, lowering the folder slightly and staring directly down at my brother. "We know exactly how you built the initial infrastructure for this fraud. A scam of this magnitude requires significant upfront capital to pay for the marketing, the fake website development, and the initial liquidity pool that tricks independent investors into thinking the project is actually legitimate." Derek suddenly squeezed his eyes shut. A single tear escaped and rolled down his pale cheek. He began shaking his head frantically, muttering the word "no" under his breath over and over again. "We traced the initial seed money used to launch the Apex Protocol," the agent declared, his voice booming with absolute authority. "We followed a massive wire transfer executed exactly 14 months ago." The agent paused, letting the heavy weight of his next words fill the quiet conference room. "You did not secure a corporate business loan," Derek, the agent, revealed coldly. "You fraudulently authorized a wire transfer of $1.2 million. The funds were completely drained from a private senior citizen retirement account." The words $1.2 million hung in the air like a physical weight. My father, Richard, completely froze. His eyes darted from the federal agent to my brother, who was still kneeling on the floor, sobbing into the carpet. Richard knew exactly how much money was in his private retirement account. He had spent his entire adult life aggressively saving that exact amount, boasting about it at every family holiday, and using it to justify his superiority over everyone else. I reached into the leather folder sitting on the mahogany table in front of me. I pulled out a freshly printed bank statement that I had legally obtained during my forensic sweep of Derek devices. I slid the crisp piece of paper across the smooth wood until it stopped right at the edge of the table directly in front of my father. "Pick it up, Dad," I instructed, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "Look at your legacy." Richard reached out with a trembling hand. He picked up the statement and brought it close to his face. I watched as his eyes scanned the bold black numbers printed at the top of the page. The current available balance in his primary life savings account and his corporate retirement fund was exactly zero. There were no pending transactions. There was no hold on the funds. The money was simply gone. Derek did not just steal from strangers on the internet, I explained, making sure every single word landed with devastating precision. He needed massive upfront capital to launch his fraudulent cryptocurrency token and pay for his luxury apartment in New York. He knew you had exactly $1.2 million sitting in an unprotected account, so he forged your signature, Richard. He bypassed your security questions and authorized a complete wire transfer directly to an offshore shell company he controlled. Richard dropped the paper as if it were burning his fingers. He looked down at Derek, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. "You stole my retirement," Richard whispered, his voice cracking under the immense weight of the betrayal. "You took everything I worked for my entire life. We trusted you, Derek. You told us you needed access to our accounts to help us set up a higher-yield investment portfolio. You promised you were taking care of our future." Derek could not even look our father in the eye. He kept his head bowed, staring at his own handcuffed wrists. "I was going to put it back," Derek sobbed pathetically. "The crypto token was supposed to go to the moon. Dad, I swear I was going to replace your money and double your retirement. But the market crashed and the investors started asking questions. I panicked. I had to drain the liquidity pool to pay off the people threatening me. I lost it all." "You did not just lose it in the market, Derek," I corrected him, my tone absolutely clinical. "I saw the expense reports. You spent $200,000 of our parents' retirement money on private jet rentals to impress your influencer friends. You bought Jasmine a $100,000 diamond ring to keep up appearances on her social media channels. You burned through their life savings buying designer clothes, luxury cars, and expensive champagne while you lied to their faces every single day. You treated their entire financial future like your personal piggy bank. And when he lost your life savings, he did not come to you and confess." I continued, turning my attention back to my parents. "He strapped a fake silicone belly to his wife and drove halfway across the country to trick you into helping him steal my house. He used you to do his dirty work because he knew you would always attack me to protect him. He completely bankrupted you, and then he manipulated you into trying to steal my money so he could pay for his legal defense." The sheer magnitude of the betrayal finally shattered the delusional reality my parents had lived in for 30 years. Their golden child, the son they had worshipped and protected at my expense, had casually destroyed their entire lives just to fund his own selfish ego. He had not just stolen their money, he had completely robbed them of their dignity and their future. Jasmine stood pressed against the glass wall, watching the entire scene unfold with wide, terrified eyes. She had always sucked up to my parents, believing they were her ultimate financial safety net if Derek ever failed. Now, she realized, she had tied herself to a man who had not only defrauded federal investors, but had completely bankrupted his own family. There was no secret trust fund waiting for them. There was no massive inheritance to bail them out. They were all completely ruined. Brenda let out a sudden guttural wail that echoed off the glass walls of the conference room. It was not a cry of anger, it was the sound of absolute total despair. Her knees gave out entirely. She collapsed backward into the heavy leather chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing uncontrollably. The wealthy, comfortable retirement she had always bragged about was completely gone. The country club memberships, the luxury vacations, the arrogant superiority she wielded over her friends, all of it had been erased by the son she loved more than anything in the world. My parents had sacrificed my childhood, my happiness, and my financial security to build a pedestal for Derek. And now, standing in this cold corporate law office, they finally realized that the golden idol they worshipped had just left them utterly destitute in their old age. The silence that followed my mother's devastated wail was thick and suffocating. Derek was still kneeling on the floor, his hands locked in the heavy steel cuffs behind his back. He looked up at my father, who was staring blankly at the wall, and then at my mother, who was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. He realized in that exact moment that his parents could not save him. Their money was gone. Their influence was completely erased. The protective shield they had held over him his entire life had just been violently shattered. Desperation clawed at his face. He twisted his body around on the carpet, struggling against the cold cuffs, and looked frantically toward the glass wall. Jasmine was still standing there, her arms wrapped defensively around her chest. Jasmine Derek pleaded, his voice cracking with absolute panic. Jasmine, baby, you have to do something right now. Call your entertainment lawyer. Call your management team in Los Angeles. Tell them what is happening here. Tell them Natalie is trying to frame me for a misunderstanding. Jasmine did not move. She just stared at him with wide, calculating eyes. Please, Derek begged, his voice growing louder and increasingly unhinged. Tell these federal agents that the stress of this false arrest is hurting our baby. Play up the pregnancy, Jasmine. Start crying. Tell them you are having severe contractions. If they think they are endangering a high-risk pregnancy, they have to back off. They will give us time to figure this out. Use your platform, go live again, and tell your followers the government is unfairly targeting a successful Black influencer and her unborn child. We can start a legal defense fund. Just do something to get these guys off me. Jasmine stood perfectly still, processing his desperate instructions. During my time investigating corporate fraud, I learned that people drawn to wealth and status are rarely bound by actual loyalty. Jasmine had built her entire online brand around a carefully curated aesthetic of effortless luxury. She married Derek solely because he presented himself as a brilliant tech visionary with endless capital. She tolerated my toxic parents because she thought they possessed massive generational wealth. She moved to Minnesota only because she thought she could co-opt my $2.5 million mansion for her own social media content. But standing in this cold conference room, Jasmine did the brutal math. She looked at my parents, who were now completely destitute, crying helplessly in their chairs. She looked at Derek, a humiliated fraud kneeling in handcuffs, facing decades in a federal penitentiary. The millions of dollars were gone. The lakefront mansion was completely out of reach. The successful tech founder narrative was actually a massive federal crime. The ship was not just sinking, it was already at the bottom of the ocean. If she played along with his delusional plan, if she continued to lie to the armed federal agents standing in the room, she would immediately be charged as a co-conspirator. She would go down for wire fraud and international money laundering right alongside him. She would lose whatever scraps of her influencer career she had left, and she would spend her best years inside a federal prison cell. Jasmine was incredibly selfish, but she was definitely not stupid. She looked down at Derek, her expression shifting from terror to absolute stone-cold detachment. The change was so sudden and severe, it was almost terrifying to witness. "I am not calling my lawyer for you," Derek, Jasmine said, her voice completely devoid of any affection or panic. "I am not going to ruin my life trying to defend a pathetic liar who just bankrupted his own parents." Derek stared up at her in sheer disbelief. "What are you saying?" He choked out, his eyes wide with betrayal. "We are a family. We have a baby on the way. You cannot just abandon us right now." Jasmine let out a sharp, humorless laugh. She stepped away from the glass wall and walked slowly toward the center of the mahogany table, stopping right in front of the lead federal agent. She did not look at Derek. She did not look at my sobbing parents. She looked directly at the man holding the federal indictment. "I want it on the official federal record right now that I had absolutely no knowledge of his illegal cryptocurrency operations." Jasmine stated, her tone crisp and completely professional. "I was manipulated. He lied to me about his income. He lied to me about his business, and he forced me to participate in this ridiculous charade against his sister. I am fully willing to cooperate with your investigation in exchange for total immunity. Derek let out a strangled gasp. Jasmine, stop, he pleaded. Think about our child. Jasmine finally looked down at him, her eyes completely dead. There is no child, Derek, she said coldly. Without a single ounce of hesitation, Jasmine reached both hands under the hem of her tight-knit maternity dress. She unhooked a thick fabric strap at her lower back. She pulled out the heavy $2,000 medical-grade silicone belly, lifted it into the air, and dropped it directly onto the polished mahogany table with a sickening heavy thud. The heavy silicone prop hit the table and rolled slightly before coming to a complete stop right next to the federal indictment folder. For a brief second, nobody in the room breathed. The sheer visual absurdity of the fake pregnant belly sitting on the polished mahogany table of a corporate law office was completely staggering. My mother Brenda let out a choked gasp, covering her mouth as if she were going to vomit. She had spent the last 3 weeks doting on that piece of plastic, buying expensive baby clothes and weaponizing it against me. Now the ultimate symbol of her golden child future was just a hollow, lifeless prop. Jasmine did not give anyone a chance to process the shock. She immediately turned her attention back to the lead federal agent, speaking rapidly and clearly. I can give you the exact location of his physical ledger, Jasmine stated, her voice echoing off the glass walls. He keeps a heavily encrypted hard drive hidden inside the lining of his leather golf bag. I know the master password to his primary offshore routing account because he made me write it down on a piece of paper and swallow it before we left New York. He wired $200,000 to a shell corporation in the Bahamas just yesterday. I have text messages, emails, and audio recordings of him admitting to the entire liquidity drain. If you grant me full federal immunity right now, I will testify to every single detail in open court. I will hand you his entire operation on a silver platter. Derek let out an agonizing primal scream that tore through the quiet office. He thrashed wildly against the steel handcuffs, the junior agents struggling to hold him down on the carpet. How could you do this to me, Jasmine? He roared, tears streaming down his face. I gave you everything. I bought you the jewelry. I bought you the cars. I built this entire life for you. I loved you. We are supposed to be a team. You cannot just abandon me like this. You are my wife. I stood silently watching my brother completely shatter. For the very first time in his entire pampered life, Derek was experiencing a fraction of the profound betrayal I had endured for decades. He was finally feeling what it was like to be used, completely drained of your resources, and then carelessly discarded the moment you were no longer beneficial to someone else. His entire relationship was nothing but a transactional illusion built on a foundation of stolen money. The moment the money evaporated, so did her loyalty. He was looking at a mirror image of his own toxic selfishness, and it was completely breaking his mind. Jasmine looked down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. You did not build a life for me, Derek, she spat viciously. You built a massive federal crime and you dragged me into the blast radius. You lied to me. You told me you were a tech visionary. If I had known you were just a pathetic thief stealing from senior citizens, I never would have walked down the aisle. You are completely useless to me now. My father Richard watched the horrific scene unfold with hollow, dead eyes. He had lost his retirement, his legacy, and now he was watching his daughter-in-law violently turn on his son. He had spent his life defending Derek and his terrible choices, but this was a disaster far beyond his control. The lead federal agent raised his hand, silencing the chaotic shouting match. He looked at the silicone belly on the table and then back up at Jasmine, his expression remaining completely stoic. Your willingness to cooperate is noted, ma'am, the lead agent said, his voice calm and authoritative. The federal prosecutor will certainly take your statement into consideration when deciding on plea arrangements. However, immunity is not granted in the field. Jasmine blinked, her confident posture faltering slightly. What does that mean? She asked, her voice dropping. I just told you I will give you everything. I am the victim here. You are not a victim, ma'am, the agent replied, stepping around the table. You are a direct beneficiary of criminal wire fraud. You actively participated in a scheme to cross state lines to evade federal authorities, and you knowingly consumed funds obtained through illegal money laundering. You may not have coded the cryptocurrency token, but you spent the stolen money. The agent nodded to one of his junior partners. The younger agent immediately stepped forward, grabbing Jasmine by the arm and spinning her around. Wait! No! Jasmine shrieked, panic completely taking over her body. I am cooperating. You cannot arrest me. I am an influencer. You are going to ruin my life. Get your hands off me. The sharp, metallic click of a second pair of steel handcuffs echoed through the room. Jasmine was forcefully detained, her arms locked behind her back, just like her husband. She struggled wildly, kicking her designer heels against the carpet, but the federal agents held her completely firm. The illusion of her glamorous, untouchable life was officially dead. The two junior federal agents wasted absolutely no time. They grabbed Jasmine by her upper arms and began marching her forcefully toward the heavy frosted glass doors of the conference room. She was hyperventilating now, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps as her designer heels dragged awkwardly across the plush corporate carpet. She did not look back at her husband or her in-laws. She was already calculating her next survival move, completely abandoning the family she had tried to exploit just moments prior. Derek was hoisted to his feet by the lead agent. His expensive Italian wool suit, the one he had proudly strutted into the office wearing, was hopelessly wrinkled and stained with his own tears. As the agent pushed him toward the exit, Derek suddenly dug his expensive leather shoes into the floor. He planted his feet, refusing to move forward, twisting his body around to look back across the long mahogany table. His eyes frantically scanned the room, looking for any remaining lifeline. He looked at my father Richard, who was still staring blankly at the wall, completely paralyzed by the loss of his life savings. He looked at my mother Brenda, who was slumped in her chair, sobbing so hard her entire body was shaking. They did not even look up to meet his gaze. They had absolutely nothing left to give him. The well of their financial and emotional support had finally run completely dry. Derek locked his tear-filled eyes onto mine. The arrogant tech founder who had stormed my gates demanding my master suite was entirely gone. In his place was a terrified, desperate little boy who had finally run out of lies. Natalie, please. Derek begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. You cannot let them take me away. You know what happens to people like me in federal prison? Please, you have to help me. You are the only one left who has any money. You can afford a high-powered defense attorney. You can pay my bail. You have millions of dollars, and you own that lakefront mansion outright. You can use the house as collateral. Just get me out of this, and I swear I will do whatever you want. I will work for you. I will pay you back every single penny. Just let me come back to the mansion, and we can figure this out as a family. We share the same blood, Natalie. I stood near the head of the table, my hands resting calmly on the cool, polished wood. I looked at the pathetic, trembling man standing before me. I thought back to the freezing cold morning just a few weeks ago, when he had pounded his fist aggressively against the window of my SUV. I remembered the exact arrogant tone of his voice when he demanded that I open the gates to my hard-earned estate. I remembered him standing in my driveway, acting like a conquering king, claiming that my home was big enough for both of us, and dictating that family always takes care of family. For 34 years, I had been expected to shrink myself so Derek could take up more space. I had been ordered to sacrifice my comfort, my finances, and my emotional well-being just to ensure he never had to face the consequences of his own selfish actions. My parents had built an entire religion out of protecting him, and they had demanded that I worship at the exact same altar. But standing in this secure corporate room, watching him beg for the very resources he had just tried to steal from me, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating sense of closure. I picked up the thick commercial eviction notice that was still resting on the table. I folded it neatly in half and slipped it into the pocket of my blazer. "You are not coming back to my house, Derek," I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of any familial warmth. You lost the right to call me your family the moment you plotted to declare me mentally unfit so you could steal my property. You lost the right to ask for my help the moment you forged our father's signature and drained his retirement account to fund your lies. You are not my brother anymore. You are just a criminal who signed a commercial lease you could not afford. Derek let out a loud, agonizing sob, his knees buckling slightly as the lead agent yanked hard on his arm, losing his patience. Let us go. The agent commanded, his voice booming with authority. Natalie, please, Derek wailed, struggling weakly against the iron grip of the federal officer. You cannot just throw me away. Where am I supposed to go? I stepped away from the mahogany table and walked slowly over to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the frozen streets of downtown Minneapolis. I looked down at the concrete pavement 40 stories below. Parked directly outside the main entrance of the corporate high-rise were three massive black armored SUVs, their red and blue emergency lights flashing silently in the morning sun. I turned back to look at my brother one final time. I raised my hand and pointed a single steady finger toward the glass. When you showed up at my gates, you demanded that I let you inside. I said my words, cutting through the air like a surgical blade. You said you wanted me to show you the door. Well, Derek, there it is. The federal agents dragged Derek and Jasmine out of the conference room. The heavy frosted glass doors swung shut behind them with a soft, definitive click. Suddenly, the massive corporate law office was completely silent. The chaotic screaming, the frantic physical threats, and the desperate bargaining were entirely gone. The only sound left in the room was the low, steady hum of the city traffic 40 stories below. I turned away from the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked back at the long mahogany table. My parents, Richard and Brenda, were sitting exactly where the federal agents had left them. They looked like two hollow, empty shells. The arrogant superiority they had marched in with just an hour ago had been entirely stripped away. My father was staring blankly at the bank statement still resting on the polished wood. He was completely unable to tear his eyes away from the zero balance that represented his stolen life savings. My mother was clutching a damp tissue, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark, jagged lines. The reality of their situation was settling into their bones like a freezing winter chill. Their golden child was going to federal prison. Their comfortable retirement was completely gone. The fake grandchild they had boasted about to all their friends at the country club was nothing but a $2,000 piece of theatrical silicone that Jasmine had casually abandoned on the table. The prop was still sitting there, an absurd and grotesque monument to the massive lie that had destroyed their family. Slowly, my mother raised her head and looked at me. For my entire life, her eyes had only ever held contempt, harsh criticism, or sheer disappointment whenever she looked in my direction. But now, as she stared at me across the expensive room, her expression morphed into something truly pathetic. She was aggressively trying to manufacture a look of deep maternal affection. The transition was so sudden and calculated it made my skin crawl. She swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. Natalie, she whispered, her tone suddenly soft and incredibly fragile. I did not answer. I just stood there watching her attempt to rewrite history in real time. Brenda slowly pushed her chair back and stood up, her knees trembling slightly. She reached a shaking hand across the wide mahogany table, palm facing upward, in a gesture of desperate supplication. Sweetheart, she said, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. We are in a terrible situation right now. Your father and I have absolutely nothing left. Derek took every single penny we had saved for the last 30 years. We cannot pay the mortgage on our house back home. We cannot even afford the flight back to New York. We are going to lose everything we have ever worked for. Richard finally looked up from the table, his eyes red and rimmed with exhausted tears. He nodded silently, backing up his wife in her desperate play for survival. We need you, Natalie. Brenda continued, taking a tentative step forward around the heavy leather chairs. You are our daughter. You are our only child now. We have always known how incredibly strong and successful you are. You have that massive, beautiful house on the lake. It is far too big for just one person. We could come live with you. We could help you take care of the estate. We could finally be a real family, just the three of us. We need a secure place to stay tonight, Natalie. Please. Family takes care of family, right? It was the exact same toxic phrase Derek had used to justify his home invasion just weeks prior. For a brief, fleeting second, I remembered all the times I had desperately craved my mother calling me sweetheart. I remembered being a little girl, hoping she would look at me with genuine pride instead of annoyance. But I was not a little girl anymore. I was a retired corporate forensic accountant who had just dismantled an international money laundering scheme before lunch. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was a parasite actively looking for a new host because her primary source of funding had just been locked inside a federal holding cell. I did not reach out to take her trembling hand. Instead, I casually walked over to my leather briefcase resting on the corner of the table. I picked up my encrypted laptop and slid it neatly inside. I gathered my legal folders, making sure the edges were perfectly aligned, and placed them carefully next to the computer. I snapped the heavy brass locks of the briefcase shut. The sharp metallic sound made both of my parents flinch in their seats. I picked up the briefcase by its sturdy leather handle and finally looked my mother directly in the eye. "I am sorry, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant and completely devoid of any actual sympathy. "But I am not running a charity for people who enabled my abuser for 30 years. If you want to rent the finished basement, the commercial lease rate is $10,000 a month paid in advance. But unfortunately, given the massive unsecured debt you now hold, your credit score is simply too low to qualify." I watched the last shred of hope completely drain from my mother's face. The brutal financial reality of my words hit her harder than any physical blow ever could. For my entire life, she had believed that my money was her money. She operated under the absolute delusion that she could treat me like garbage for decades and then simply demand my resources the second she ruined her own life. But the bank was permanently closed. I turned my back on them without another word. I walked toward the heavy frosted glass doors of the conference room. I did not look back when my father let out a pathetic, broken sob. I did not stop when my mother called my name one last time, her voice cracking in absolute desperation. I simply pushed the door open and stepped out into the quiet, brightly lit hallway of the law firm. Miss Montgomery followed me out, closing the door firmly behind us, sealing my parents inside their self-made prison of consequence. She looked at me and offered a small, respectful nod. "You handled that perfectly, Natalie," she said, her tone completely professional, but laced with genuine approval. "I will have my paralegals escort them out of the building in 10 minutes. If they attempt to return or cause a scene downstairs, building security has strict orders to involve the local police." "Thank you, Ms. Montgomery," I replied, adjusting the strap of my heavy leather briefcase on my shoulder. "Bill me for the extra time, and please make sure the commercial eviction notices are formally filed with the county clerk by noon." "Consider it done," she said, turning back toward her office. I walked down the long carpeted hallway toward the bank of elevators. I pressed the silver call button and watched the digital floor indicator light up. My heart was beating steadily. My hands were not shaking. I expected to feel some kind of overwhelming guilt or sadness at completely abandoning my family. Society programs us to believe that cutting off our parents is the ultimate unforgivable sin. But as the sleek metal elevator doors slid open and I stepped inside the empty cab, I realized I felt absolutely no guilt at all. I only felt a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. As the elevator began its rapid 40-story descent, I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen and opened my contact list. I scrolled down until I saw my mother name. I thought about all the birthdays she ruined because Derek needed the attention. I thought about the college fund she stole and the constant barrage of insults regarding my career and my appearance. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I pressed the block contact button. The screen flashed confirming the action. I scrolled down to my father's name. I thought about the cruel threats he screamed at me across the mahogany table just 30 minutes ago. I pressed block again. The digital severing was instantaneous. The ultimate boundary had finally been set. They could no longer call me to beg for money. They could no longer text me manipulative guilt trips. They could no longer use my phone as a direct pipeline to drain my energy. I had officially amputated the toxic limbs that had been poisoning my life for 34 years. The generational trauma ended right here in this descending elevator. The doors opened at the ground floor lobby. I walked past the marble security desk and pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors. I stepped out into the freezing crisp air of downtown Minneapolis. The three armored federal SUVs were completely gone, taking my brother and his fake pregnant wife to the federal holding facility. The street was bustling with normal everyday people drinking coffee and heading to work completely unaware of the massive criminal takedown that had just occurred above them. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, pulling my warm wool coat tighter around my shoulders. I was a completely free woman. I had my wealth, I had my career, and most importantly, I had my peace of mind. I started walking toward the parking garage where I had left my car ready to drive back to my massive, quiet lakefront mansion. Just as I crossed the street, my phone vibrated sharply in my coat pocket. I pulled it out expecting an update from Ms. Montgomery regarding my parents exiting the building. Instead, the screen displayed a new text message from the president of my gated homeowner association. I opened the message and read the bold text. Natalie, we noticed you officially registered your property as a commercial event space this morning. Please be advised that commercial vehicles are strictly prohibited from parking overnight in residential zones. Since those two massive moving trucks have been idling on your property for 2 days, we have officially towed and impounded them. The city impound lot charges $500 a day per truck. I stared at the screen and let out a genuine laugh. Derek had packed his entire life into those trucks. All of his stolen luxury goods, his expensive furniture, and Jasmine designer clothes were locked inside. And now, because he had arrogantly signed my commercial lease agreement, his entire life was sitting in a city impound lot, racking up massive daily fees he could never afford to pay. I locked my phone and slid it back into my coat pocket. The thought of Derek and his stolen luxury furniture sitting in a city impound lot, racking up $500 a day per truck, was the absolute perfect end to the morning. I walked directly to my car, drove back to my peaceful lakefront mansion, and finally unpacked the heavy boxes they had aggressively shoved into my basement. 2 weeks passed in absolute glorious silence. No unannounced visits, no demanding phone calls, just the quiet luxury of a life I had built entirely with my own 2 hands. But while my world was perfectly calm, the outside world was tearing my brother and his wife apart. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking black coffee when the local news station flashed a breaking report across the television screen. The federal indictment had officially been unsealed to the public. The bold headline read, "Multi-million-dollar crypto fraud uncovered in Minnesota." They showed a courtroom sketch of Derek looking disheveled, pale, and completely terrified. Jasmine had tried to save herself by cooperating with the federal agents, but she severely underestimated how the internet operates. Once the court documents became public record, her millions of followers found out everything. They discovered that the luxury lifestyle she constantly flaunted was funded entirely by stolen retirement accounts. But the ultimate nail in her coffin was the fake pregnancy. An insider leaked the detail about the theatrical silicone belly she dropped on the conference room table to save her own skin. The public outrage was swift and merciless. Her brand sponsors immediately dropped her. Her social media accounts were seized by federal authorities as part of the criminal asset forfeiture process. The glamorous, untouchable influencer was now a national punchline, facing her own accessory charges and completely broke. While the internet was busy dismantling Jasmine, I was proactively protecting myself from the collateral damage of my parents. I was sitting in my basement office on a secure video call with my attorney, Miss Montgomery. My parents were entirely destitute, and they were currently living in a cheap, dirty motel outside of town, paid for by a distant relative who felt sorry for them. But my forensic accounting background taught me that desperate people use desperate measures. I wanted to make absolutely sure they could not weaponize the legal system against me. I asked Ms. Montgomery about filial responsibility laws. In over half of the states in this country, there are archaic laws on the books that allow impoverished parents or the state government to actually sue adult children for financial support. It means that if your toxic parents completely squander their retirement on a golden child, you can be legally forced to pay for their housing and medical care. It is a terrifying concept that essentially forces successful children to subsidize the terrible financial decisions of their abusers. Thankfully, we did not live in a state that aggressively enforced those specific statutes, but I was not taking any chances. Ms. Montgomery and I spent hours restructuring my assets. We legally moved my liquid capital and my real estate equity into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. On paper, my personal taxable income was completely minimized. If Richard and Brenda ever tried to drag me into a civil courtroom and force me to pay them a monthly allowance, they would find absolutely nothing to attach a legal lien to. My wealth was completely bulletproof. They made their bed with Derek, and now they were going to sleep in it alone. After we finalized the trust documents, Ms. Montgomery leaned back in her leather chair on the video screen. She looked down at a fresh stack of legal briefings resting on her desk. "Oh, and there is one more update regarding your brother," she said, her tone shifting to a more serious professional register. His federal public defender filed an emergency motion for a bail hearing early this morning. Derek was begging the federal judge to let him out pending trial so he could prepare his legal defense. I felt a brief flash of tension tighten in my chest. If Derek was released on bail, he would be completely desperate and highly unpredictable. "Did the judge grant it?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Ms. Montgomery smiled, a very thin and deeply satisfied smile. "Not a chance," she replied smoothly. The federal prosecutor presented the encrypted internet search history you provided. Because he had been actively searching for non-extradition countries and fast ways to obtain secondary passports, the judge classified him as an extreme and immediate flight risk. Derek was denied bail entirely. He is staying locked in a cold federal concrete cell until his criminal trial officially begins. A massive spring storm swept across Lake Minnetonka 2 nights after the news of the federal indictment broke. The freezing rain fell in heavy sheets, violently lashing against the thick insulated windows of my master bedroom. The wind was howling off the dark water, but inside my $2.5 million mansion, everything was perfectly warm and silent. I was sitting in my plush leather armchair, next to the roaring gas fireplace, reading a novel and enjoying the absolute tranquility of my secure life. Suddenly, the soft chime of my perimeter security alarm echoed from the smart home control panel mounted on the wall. I marked my page, set the book down, and walked over to the glowing screen. I tapped the icon for the main gate cameras, pulling up the high-definition night vision feed. The black and white video illuminated the heavy rain pouring down over the cobblestone driveway. And there, standing right outside the heavy iron bars of my property, was my father, Richard. He did not have his luxury corporate sedan anymore. He must have taken a cheap rideshare or walked from a bus stop in the pouring rain. He was wearing a thin beige trench coat that was completely soaked through, clinging to his frail, aging frame. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his shoulders were hunched against the biting cold. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, terrifying patriarch who had screamed at me across a mahogany conference table just a few weeks ago. He looked small, pathetic, and completely defeated. He stepped up to the glowing intercom box mounted on the stone pillar and pressed the silver call button with a shaking finger. "Natalie, please." His voice crackled through the speaker in my bedroom, distorted by the heavy rain and the wind. "I know you are in there. I know you can see me. Please answer the gate." I stood perfectly still, watching him on the monitor. I did not reach out to press the microphone button. I did not give him the satisfaction of hearing my voice. "Natalie, I am begging you," Richard sobbed, leaning his forehead against the cold iron bars of the gate. "Your mother and I have absolutely nothing. We were kicked out of the motel today because the credit card declined. We have nowhere else to go. We have no money for food. Derek ruined our lives. We made a mistake. We should have listened to you. Please just open the gate and let me out of the rain. I am your father. You cannot just leave me out here to die in the cold." When I still did not answer, he took a step back from the intercom. His legs trembled violently before giving out entirely. Richard, the man who had demanded total subservience and perfection from me, my entire life physically dropped to his knees on the wet, hard cobblestones. He buried his face in his hands, kneeling in the freezing mud, and wept openly into the dark, stormy night. I stared at the glowing security monitor, analyzing the scene with the cold, clinical detachment of a forensic accountant reviewing a bankrupt spreadsheet. For decades, this exact sight would have sent me into a desperate, frantic spiral. The trauma bond my parents had carefully cultivated since my childhood was designed to make me feel entirely responsible for their emotional state. In the past, if my father was angry, I believed I had to fix it. If he was suffering, I believed it was my duty to sacrifice myself to save him. They had programmed me to put their needs above my own survival. But as I watched him kneeling in the dirt, pleading for the resources he had previously tried to steal from me, I realized something incredibly profound. I placed my hand flat against my chest and felt my heart beat. It was perfectly slow and steady. My breathing was deep and calm. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no surge of panic. I did not feel the desperate urge to run out into the storm and comfort him. The invisible heavy chains of the trauma bond were completely permanently broken. I looked at him and felt absolutely nothing. The years of emotional abuse, the relentless gaslighting, and the cruel favoritism had finally completely nullified my love for him. He was just a stranger trespassing on my property. I turned away from the video feed and tapped a different icon on the smart home panel. It was the direct emergency line to the private security firm contracted by my exclusive gated community. The dispatcher answered immediately. "Yes, this is Natalie at the Lakefront Estate," I said, my voice smooth and untroubled. "There is an unauthorized individual loitering at my front gate and refusing to leave the premises. Please send a patrol unit to remove him immediately." I hung up the call and turned back to the monitor. Less than 3 minutes later, a black security SUV with flashing amber lights cut through the heavy rain and pulled up right behind my kneeling father. Two large security guards stepped out into the storm, wearing heavy reflective rain slickers. Richard scrambled to his feet wildly, pointing at my gate and arguing with the guards, claiming he was the father of the homeowner and had a right to be there. But the guards did not care about his excuses. They grabbed him firmly by both arms, completely ignoring his desperate protests, and forcefully escorted him away from my property, disappearing into the dark, freezing night. The storm that night washed away the last remnants of my old life. After the private security guards physically dragged my father away from my heavy iron gates and shoved him into the freezing rain, I never saw him or my mother in person again. The months that followed were a chaotic whirlwind of federal court proceedings and highly publicized legal maneuvering. The justice system moves slowly, but when the federal government is involved, it moves with absolute crushing certainty. I watched the final verdict from the comfort of my home office, streaming the courtroom feed live on my computer screen. Derek stood before the stern federal judge, completely stripped of his arrogant tech founder persona. He was wearing an oversized orange jumpsuit, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. The judge did not show him a single ounce of mercy. Because he had deliberately defrauded senior citizens and actively attempted to flee the jurisdiction, Derek was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He was also ordered to pay millions in restitution, a massive financial debt that would completely guarantee his absolute ruin for the rest of his natural life. Jasmine did not escape unscathed either. Her desperate attempt to secure total federal immunity failed completely because she had actively spent the stolen money to fund her lavish lifestyle. She managed to avoid a long prison sentence by testifying against my brother, but she was sentenced to 5 years of strict federal probation and burdened with massive financial penalties. Her influencer career was entirely dead. The internet never forgave her for the fake silicone pregnancy stunt. She was forced to move back into her childhood bedroom completely broke and universally despised by the audience she had once manipulated. But the most profound poetic justice fell directly onto the shoulders of my parents, Richard and Brenda. For 30 years, they had worshipped their golden child and treated me like an expendable resource. They had willingly handed over their entire life savings to fund his massive ego. Now they were forced to live with the permanent consequences of that choice. Their luxurious suburban home was foreclosed on by the bank. Their exclusive country club memberships were revoked, and their wealthy friends completely abandoned them to avoid the toxic public scandal. Without any retirement funds or financial support from me, they hit absolute rock bottom. Through the legal updates provided by my attorney, I learned that my parents were forced to relocate to a tiny, cramped, subsidized apartment complex on the dusty outskirts of the city. To pay for their basic groceries and utility bills, they had to re-enter the workforce in their late 60s. My father, the man who used to boast loudly about his superior investment strategies, was now working the early morning shift as a door greeter at a massive discount retail store. My mother Brenda, the woman who once looked down on anyone wearing last season designer clothing, was now stocking shelves at a local pharmacy for minimum wage. Their feet ached. Their pride was completely shattered, and they had absolutely no one to blame but themselves. They had spent their entire adult lives building a grand monument to a son who ultimately destroyed them. There was no secret bailout, and there was no magical redemption arc. The financial and legal destruction they experienced was completely permanent. As for me, my life moved forward with incredible peace. About 8 months after the final sentencing hearing, I walked out to my mailbox at the end of the cobblestone driveway. The crisp autumn air was refreshing. Inside the metal box, sitting on top of a stack of boring utility bills, was a standard government-issued envelope. I pulled it out and looked at the return address printed in stark block letters in the top left corner. It was from a federal correctional institution. The sender was listed simply by an inmate number and the name Derek. I stood in the driveway holding the thin paper envelope. I knew exactly what was inside. It was undoubtedly a desperate letter filled with manufactured apologies begging for commissary money or pleading with me to pay for an expensive appeals lawyer. He probably wrote pages upon pages about how he had found religion or how he finally understood the true value of family. He was trying to cast one last manipulative hook into my life. I walked back inside my beautiful, quiet house, heading straight for my home office. I walked over to the heavy-duty cross-cut paper shredder sitting next to my desk. I did not open the envelope. I did not even break the seal. I simply dropped the letter into the glowing slot and listened to the loud, satisfying sound of the steel blades grinding his final words into tiny, meaningless pieces of confetti. I watched the last shred of white paper disappear into the machine. The mechanical whirring stopped, leaving my home office in complete and total silence. I stood there for a moment, looking down at the clear plastic bin filled with the destroyed remains of my brother's final attempt to manipulate me. There was a time in my life when ignoring a letter from him would have sent me into a frantic spiral of agonizing guilt. I would have paced the floor, agonizing over what he wrote, wondering if he was truly suffering, wondering if I was a terrible sister for turning my back on him when he was at his lowest point. I would have questioned my own sanity. But now, staring at the shredded confetti, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of closure. The ghost of my past had finally been exorcised. I turned off the office lights and walked out into the grand hallway of my estate. The late afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, warm shadows across the pristine hardwood floors. I walked through the massive gourmet kitchen, running my hand along the smooth marble island where Derek had arrogantly signed away his freedom on that commercial lease agreement. The house was spotless. There were no dirty footprints on the floor, no empty fast food bags left on the counters, and no chaotic shouting echoing down from the second floor. The toxic energy they had forcefully brought into this space had been completely scrubbed clean. I walked over to the custom wine fridge built into the custom cabinetry. I opened the glass door and selected a heavy dark bottle of vintage Pinot Noir I had been saving for a special occasion. I grabbed a silver corkscrew and pulled the cork, listening to the satisfying pop. I poured a generous amount into a crystal glass, watching the rich liquid swirl against the sides. I picked up the glass and walked toward the heavy glass doors leading out to the master balcony. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The view from my balcony overlooking Lake Minnetonka was absolutely breathtaking. The water was perfectly calm, reflecting the vibrant streaks of orange, purple, and deep crimson that painted the expansive Minnesota sky. The tall pine trees lining the edge of the property swayed gently in the light breeze. I walked over to the edge of the stone railing and rested my hands against the cool surface, taking a deep breath of the fresh pine-scented air. Looking out over the water, I allowed myself to fully reflect on everything that had transpired over the last year. Society places a massive, heavy burden on the concept of blood relation. We are conditioned from birth to believe that family is an unbreakable bond that demands absolute loyalty, regardless of how poorly we are treated. We are told to forgive the unforgivable simply because we share the same DNA. But my journey taught me the absolute hardest lesson of all. Family is not defined by biology. Family is defined by mutual respect, consistent boundaries, and genuine care. My parents and my brother demanded my loyalty, but they offered me absolutely nothing but exploitation in return. They viewed my success not as something to celebrate, but as a personal bank account they could raid whenever they faced the consequences of their own terrible decisions. Cutting them off was the most difficult, terrifying thing I ever had to do, but it was also the single action that saved my life. By amputating the toxic rod of my family tree, I finally gave myself the space to grow. I stopped being the scapegoat in their delusional narrative, and I finally became the sole author of my own life. I know that in their minds, I will always be the villain. To the few relatives they still speak to, they undoubtedly tell a completely twisted version of this story, where I am the greedy, cruel sister who ruthlessly destroyed a loving family over a simple misunderstanding. But I do not care about their narrative anymore. Their opinions hold absolutely no power over me. The greatest revenge you can ever achieve against toxic people is simply living a beautiful, peaceful life completely free of their influence. Before I sign off, I want to ask all of you watching a very important question. Have you ever had to make the incredibly painful decision to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own mental and financial well-being? How did you find the strength to set those final boundaries? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences could be the exact motivation someone else needs to finally stand up for themselves. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, boundary setting, and finding your own justice. I brought the crystal glass to my lips and took a slow sip of the vintage Pinot Noir. The wine was rich, complex, and perfectly balanced. I looked back out over the lake as the final sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into a beautiful, calming twilight. I stood alone on the balcony of my $2.5 million mansion, surrounded by the profound, absolute silence of a life I built and protected all by myself. I closed my eyes, taking in the perfect peace. The screen fades to black. The story of Natalie and her toxic relatives offers a profound and necessary lesson about the true definition of family and the critical importance of establishing firm boundaries. For generations, society has conditioned us to believe that sharing the same bloodline automatically demands our unconditional loyalty, financial support, and emotional sacrifice. We are often taught to forgive the unforgivable, and tolerate exploitation simply because the people hurting us happen to be our parents or siblings. However, this narrative teaches us that biology is never a free pass for abuse. The most empowering lesson here is that family should be defined by mutual respect, consistent support, and genuine care, not by genetics. When Natalie was confronted by a brother who sought to steal her hard-earned wealth, and parents who enthusiastically enabled his deceit, she did not succumb to the traditional pressures of familial obligation. Instead, she recognized that they were treating her not as a loved one, but as an expendable resource. By utilizing her intellect and remaining completely detached from their emotional manipulation, she successfully amputated the unhealthy relationships that had poisoned her life for decades. Her journey illustrates that walking away from toxic family members is not an act of cruelty, but a vital act of self-preservation. Setting ironclad boundaries protects your peace, your mental health, and the life you have painstakingly built from the ground up. It reminds us that we have the absolute right to curate our own inner circle and protect our personal sanctuaries from those who seek to tear them down. You never owe your future to the people who mistreated you in the past. If you are currently sacrificing your own well-being to appease toxic relatives, take the first step today to establish firm boundaries and reclaim your peace.